150 years ago, Oregon was the undisputed leader of the Pacific Northwest. It was the original territory and state, and it was an agricultural powerhouse. But today, Washington has nearly double the population, with an economy over 2.5 times larger. By nearly every metric, Washington is the more successful state. So what happened, and why is Oregon so much less successful despite being so much older than Washington? As usual, the answer starts with the two states having similar, but surprisingly different, physical geographies. When most people picture the Pacific Northwest, they imagine a single monolithic landscape, endless rain, towering evergreen forests, and misty, dramatic coastlines. It's the land of Portland and Seattle, of coffee and grunge, a unified region of green. But this perception, while romantic, masks a profound truth. The states of Oregon and Washington, often seen as twins, are built on foundations that are deeply, almost fundamentally different. Oregon, one of the first great destination of America's westward expansion, is a land of incredible geographic diversity. But its landscape is also a paradox, a puzzle of fertile abundance locked next to profound isolation. Understanding this physical blueprint is the first step to understanding the entire history of the region. It's the story of why Oregon was the original prize, and how, baked into its very geology, were the seeds of its future. This geographic DNA laid down millions of years ago would ultimately play a crucial role in the story of two states, and why one pulled so dramatically far ahead. The story of both states begins with one colossal feature, the Cascade Mountain Range. This volcanic spine, running north to south, is not just a line of mountains. It's a wall that creates two entirely different worlds. To the west of the Cascades, moisture-laden air from the Pacific Ocean is forced upward, dumping massive amounts of rain and creating the lush, temperate rainforests that define the region. To the east, the air descends, now dry, creating a vast, arid rain shadow that stretches for hundreds of miles. But here's where the first crucial difference emerges. The Washington Cascades are defined by massive, isolated, and brutally rugged volcanoes, like Mount Rainier and Mount St. Helens, built atop an older, deeply eroded bedrock. They are staggering individual fortresses. The Oregon Cascades, by contrast, are a younger, broader volcanic plateau. While crowned by its own famous peaks like Mount Hood and the Three Sisters, the range itself is a more continuous, high-elevation constructural landscape. This subtle geologic difference would have major implications for how people and commerce would one day move across them. But the mountains themselves are only part of the story. The real game changer isn't the peaks, it's what lies on either side of them. In the West, the primary difference between the two states becomes crystal clear. Oregon's prize? The engine of its entire 19th century settlement is the Willamette Valley. Tucked between the low-slung Coast Range and the mighty Cascades, the Willamette is a wide, flat, and profoundly fertile alluvial plain. It was, quite literally, the Eden at the end of the Oregon Trail. It was a paradise for farmers. This valley defined Oregon's destiny as an agricultural powerhouse. Washington, on the other hand, has the Puget Sound. This is not a valley, it's a massive, deep-water inland sea. It's a complex network of fjords, inlets, and natural harbors, all protected from the violent Pacific Ocean. This geography wasn't built for farming, it was built for shipping. While Oregon settlers looked down at the rich soil, Washington's future founders looked out at the deep water. This single difference, rich soil versus deep water, would define the economic DNA of both states for a century. But this east-west comparison only tells half the story. The true stark contrast lies in the other Oregon and the other Washington. If you drive east from Portland or Seattle, you enter the dry side. At a glance, they look similar: sagebrush, basalt cliffs, and sweeping empty skies. But geologically, they are worlds apart. Eastern Washington is the Columbia Plateau. Its destiny is dominated by the river that gives it its name. The mighty Columbia, joined by powerful tributaries like the Snake and Yakima, carve through this landscape. This river system, later harnessed by massive dams like the Grand Coulee, provides two critical resources: water for vast irrigation and a transport corridor to the sea. This is why Eastern Washington, while dry, is an agricultural behemoth of apples, wine, and wheat, and why it supports larger cities like Spokane and the Tri-Cities. Now look at Eastern Oregon. A huge portion of southeastern Oregon is not part of the Columbia Plateau. Instead, it's the high desert, a northern extension of the Great Basin. In the Great Basin, the rivers don't flow to the ocean. They flow inland and die in alkali flats and dry lake beds. This is a land of fault block mountains like the Steens, and vast isolated basins. It is geographically and hydrologically cut off from the rest of the world. This is why eastern Washington has a population of over 1.5 million, while the vast empty expanse of eastern Oregon is home to fewer than 200,000. It's a land of isolation. Even the coastlines tell this story. Oregon's 363-mile coast is world famous. It's a stunning, accessible line of sea stacks, cliffs, and public beaches, thanks to Highway 101 running directly beside it. But it has almost no natural deepwater ports. The one great port it has, Portland, is 100 miles inland from the Columbia, a river with one of the most dangerous maritime passages on Earth at its mouth. Washington's Pacific coast is short, wild, and mostly inaccessible. Its real coast is the 3,000 plus miles of shoreline inside the Puget Sound, offering some of the finest natural harbors on the planet. This is the physical stage. Oregon is a state of two halves, a gentle, fertile, and accessible western valley, and a vast, isolated, and harsh eastern desert. Washington is a state of connection, an industrial, deep-water western sound, and a productive, irrigated eastern plateau, both linked by the greatest river in the West. This geography explains why everyone came to Oregon first. The Willamette Valley was the obvious prize, but it doesn't explain how this head start was lost. To understand that, we have to look at the people themselves and the political lines they drew right across this dramatic landscape. That idea of a head start is key. Just having a great foundation isn't enough. You have to be proactive to maintain it. That's true for a region, and it's just as true for our own personal health, especially as schedules get busy. First, thank you to AG1 for sponsoring this video. Making these videos involves a lot of research with long recording days. And with more GeoLex travels and the holidays coming up, my routine is about to get completely thrown off. And when that happens, it's easy for my nutrition to also get off track. That's why, for a long time now, the very first thing I do every morning is drink AG1. It's just one scoop, once a day, and it's the simplest way I've found to start my day proactively. Personally, I'm a big fan of the new tropical flavor. As we get into the colder season, it's nice to remember that there are warmer places out there. But also, it's my daily health drink with over 75 vitamins, minerals, pre- and probiotics, and whole food sourced ingredients. For me, it's about supporting my gut health and supporting my energy levels for the long day ahead. But most importantly, it replenishes commonly underconsumed daily micronutrients that I might miss when my diet isn't perfect, especially during busy workdays and chaotic travel around the world. It helps me stay consistent, even when the rest of my routine isn't. So, if you want to take ownership of your health, AG1 is making it easy to get started. Go to drinkag1.com/Geoff or scan the QR code on your screen to claim your free welcome kit. You'll get a free bottle of vitamin D3K2, the AG1 shaker bottle, and a sample pack of all 3 new AG1 flavors. Again, that's drinkag1.com/Geoff or scan the QR code. Once again, a huge thank you to AG1. Now, let's get back to the people and the lines they drew that would change the destiny of this entire region. For more than 10,000 years, the physical geography of the Pacific Northwest was home to many, many indigenous cultures. The rich fisheries of the Columbia River were the domain of the Chinook, masters of trade. The fertile Willamette Valley, so crucial to our story, was carefully managed by the Kalapuya. East of the mountains, the high plains were home to the Nez Perce, Cayusa, Umatilla, and so many more. These societies were built around the land's resources: the salmon, the camas root, the deep water, and the dry plains. They were the first to understand the region's profound geographic divisions. But this ancient world, shaped by watersheds and tradition, was about to be violently redefined by an entirely new force: straight lines drawn on a map by people who had never seen the land. The story of Oregon as a political idea begins not with a gradual settlement, but with a flood. In the 1840s, a concept known as manifest destiny gripped the United States. Spurred by glowing reports of a paradise at the end of the line, thousands of American settlers began a grueling 2,000-mile overland journey. This was the Oregon Trail, but they were not heading to the abstract Pacific Northwest. They were heading to a very specific place for a very specific reason. They were heading to the Willamette Valley. The Willamette Valley was, to their eyes, a pre-made Eden, fertile, flat, well-watered, and supposedly free for the taking. This singular focus had an immediate and permanent consequence. It established the Willamette Valley as the undisputed center of American power, population, and politics in the region. At the time, however, this land was not an American possession. It was Oregon country, a vast, undefined territory jointly occupied by the United States and Great Britain. But the sudden arrival of tens of thousands of American farmers quickly tipped the scales. By 1846, with the slogan 54-40 or fight ringing in their ears, diplomats signed the Oregon Treaty, formally ceding the entire region south of the 49th parallel to the United States. In 1848, the Oregon Territory was officially created. This new territory was a continental behemoth. It stretched from the Pacific to the Rockies, including all of modern-day Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and parts of Montana and Wyoming, and its entire political and economic gravity was centered in one place, the Willamette Valley. The capital was Oregon City and later Salem. The legislature, the businesses, and the population were all clustered south of the Columbia River. But there was a problem. A small but growing number of American settlers had not stopped in the Willamette Valley. They had crossed the formidable Columbia River and headed north to the forested shores of the Puget Sound. These northern settlers were a different breed. They weren't primarily farmers looking for soil. They were loggers, merchants, and shippers looking for deep water and timber. Their entire existence was oriented around the Sound and the sea. From their perspective, the territorial government hundreds of miles south in Salem was, at best, irrelevant, and at worst, a hostile foreign power. They felt ignored, unrepresented, and misunderstood. The Columbia River, a geographic superhighway, had become a political and cultural gulf. This next part completely changed the balance of power in the Northwest. In 1852, a group of frustrated settlers from the Puget Sound region gathered in the town of Monticello. They were furious. The Willamette Valley government, they claimed, taxed them without providing services, failed to protect them, and refused to build the roads they needed to survive. They drafted a petition to the US Congress, making a radical request: split the Oregon Territory in two, right along the Columbia River. They were, in effect, declaring their independence from the Oregon establishment. They proposed to call the new territory Columbia. Congress, seeing the obvious geographic logic of the split, agreed almost immediately. In 1853, the Washington Territory was born. In a final, slightly ironic twist, Congress rejected the name Columbia to avoid confusion with the District of Columbia, and instead named it Washington in honor of the first president, which is a little weird because it would also share that name with the country's capital. Anyways, this single political act cemented the region's destiny. The great unified Oregon Territory was gone. In its place were two new competing entities. Oregon, now with its vast northern half, consolidated its power in the Willamette Valley. With its population base secure and its agricultural economy booming, it raced ahead, achieving statehood just 6 years later in 1859. It was the 33rd state in the Union, the established elder statesman of the Pacific Northwest. Washington, by contrast, was a sparsely populated, undeveloped wilderness. It had its deep water sound, its endless forests, and its new, tiny capital at Olympia, but little else. And because of that, it would languish as a territory for another 30 long years before finally joining the Union in 1889. By every metric of the 19th century, Oregon was destined to be the economic and political capital of the Pacific Northwest. The fact that it didn't happen, and that its northern neighbor would one day eclipse it in almost every way, is the real mystery. And it's where our story turns next. By nearly every metric, Oregon should have become the unassailable giant of the Pacific Northwest. Its primary city, Portland, was the region's dominant financial and cultural center. Seattle, by contrast, was a scrappy remote timber town. But today, the numbers tell an entirely different story. Washington's population of nearly 8 million people dwarfs Oregon's 4.3 million. Its 2024 GDP of over $850 billion is more than 2.5 times larger than Oregon's $331 billion. Its GDP per person is the fourth highest in the United States, while Oregon is stuck at 29th. Washington boasts a higher percentage of college graduates and, by nearly every measure, its economy is larger, more diversified, and more influential. So what happened? Oregon had the head start, but Washington had two aces up its sleeve: a deepwater port and a relentless, opportunistic ambition. The Great Divergence didn't happen by accident. It was the result of two pivotal events that tipped the scales, followed by a century of compounding advantages. The first game changer came in 1897. Both states were in the grip of a severe economic depression. Then, on July 17th, a ship named the SS Portland, which is a strange coincidence, docked not in its namesake city, but in Seattle. It was carrying over 2 tons of gold from the Klondike in Canada. The gold rush was on. This is the moment that changed everything. Portland, The established city was cautious, but Seattle's city leaders, led by a man named Erastus Brainerd, saw a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. They launched a massive, nationwide marketing campaign, printing hundreds of thousands of newspapers and flyers declaring Seattle as the one and only gateway to Alaska. They branded their city as the only place to buy the ton of goods that miners needed for the journey. It was one of the most successful marketing campaigns in American history, and estimated 75% of the prospectors and their money flooded into Seattle. By 1900, Seattle's bank clearances, the measure of money changing hands, had surpassed Portland's. Its population exploded, and the money from the rush wasn't just spent, it was invested. It built permanent shipping lines, a robust financial sector, and cemented the city's rail and port connections. In a single stroke, Seattle had stolen the region's momentum and its title as the financial capital of the Northwest. The second great divergence came with the 20th century. Oregon's economy, while diversifying, remained heavily anchored by its natural resources, primarily timber. Washington, however, leveraged its Klondike-built infrastructure and its superior ports for something bigger: global industry. In 1916, a timber merchant named William Boeing founded an airplane company on the shores of Lake Washington. While Oregon's economy rose and fell with the price of lumber, Boeing turned Washington into a global aerospace hub. Fueled by massive World War II and Cold War military contracts, Boeing became an economic engine on a scale Oregon had never, and still hasn't, seen. It wasn't just a company, it was a quasi-public utility that built a massive, highly skilled, high-wage industrial middle class. This set the stage for the final, decisive split in the 1980s. Both states faced a crisis as the timber industry collapsed, and both states pivoted brilliantly into technology. But how they pivoted reveals everything. Oregon built the Silicon Forest. This was a homegrown success story, seeded in the 1940s by Tektronix, a company that became a university for engineers who left to start hundreds of spin-off companies. This ecosystem attracted giants like Intel, which today operates its largest and most advanced R&D and manufacturing hub in the world in Hillsboro, just outside Portland. Alongside this, another Oregon original, Nike, grew from a van in Eugene to the world's dominant sportswear brand. These are massive, globally important companies that saved Oregon's economy. But here's the crucial difference. Oregon's tech industry, anchored by Intel, specialized in hardware manufacturing, chip design, and physical products. Washington's tech boom, built on the foundations of Boeing's engineering talent pool, went into software. In 1979, a company called Microsoft moved from New Mexico to its founder's home state. In the 1990s, another local, Jeff Bezos, founded an online bookstore called Amazon in a Bellevue garage. These two companies did not just create products, they created entire new, exponentially scalable digital platforms. Microsoft built the operating system for the personal computer. Amazon, leveraging its proximity to Seattle's massive port and shipping infrastructure, built the operating system for global e-commerce. Then, they both built the cloud, Azure and Amazon Web Services, which is the foundation of the entire modern internet. This is the final answer to our puzzle. Oregon's economy, from the Willamette Valley farmers to the Nike and Intel campuses, is a story of incredible success in making things. It's a world-class economy of agriculture, apparel, and advanced manufacturing. But Washington's economy, from the Puget Sound ports to the Microsoft and Amazon campuses, is a story of leverage and multiplication. It built its fortune on being a gateway, first to Alaska's gold, then to Asia's markets, and finally to the world's data. By any measure, Oregon built one of the world's most successful economies. Its GDP per person at nearly $78,000 would place it ninth in the world if it was its own country. But Washington, by pure geographic luck and a few key moments of brilliant, ruthless strategy, managed to build an economic empire that dwarfs its older sibling. Speaking of Oregon, I'm back in my home state, and this week I'm heading south to Crater Lake to find out why Oregon has just a single national park. And you should come join me over on my travel channel. I hope you enjoyed learning all about Oregon and Washington. If you did, please subscribe to the channel. And of course, check out this video about Astoria, the Pacific Northwest's long-lost major city. Thanks for watching. See you next time.